Hi, folks. How are you? Hope this finds you well. It's been a busy old month so far, even if we aren't even halfway through November. It's my favourite time of year, to be honest, because there's always so many films around to see in the lead up to award season and festivals and all that kind of thing. So I have been swimming in a wonderful ocean of creativity over the past few weeks. In fact, today I just returned from watching Licorice Pizza, the new Paul Thomas Anderson film. We are waiting with bated breath to see whether we can get time with him. I've put in so many requests for him and also for his regular companion when it comes to creativity in the form of Johnny Greenwood. But he also ties in with this week's episode actually in a second. So I'll tell you all about that in just a second. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your lovely feedback as well. Ben's been putting out these fantastic little video clips as little teasers to either existing episodes, forthcoming episodes, and we've got some great stuff on the way. So many great interviews to come. I'm very excited to share them with you. I managed to get Lin-Manuel Miranda talking about many things. Hamilton, obviously, Tick Tick Boom, his first actually, his directorial debut in a feature film, which stars Andrew Garfield, which is utterly outstanding. It's so good. But anyway, loads of that kind of thing to come, which is great. I'm looking forward to sharing them with you as well. And thanks for the response to Chloe Zhao as well. It was really great. It was quite a short chat, but it was really great to get the opportunity to talk to her. Considering we've kind of bookended the year with her, to be honest, because we spoke to her at the start of the year very briefly about Nomadland, and then getting the chance to chat to her about, the wealth of input there was in Eternals, a huge, huge film, and one that I really enjoyed as well. I watched it with my kids and we had a great time. So thanks for the response to that as well. But our latest guest in this bumper run of soundtrack, and if you haven't already discovered that we are releasing 2 episodes a week at the minute, is the Chilean director Pablo Larraín, who brought us many gems, including Tony Manero and Jackie. Now, Pablo's latest film is Spencer, which I'm sure you've seen posters for or you've heard about, but it tells the story of Princess Diana's decision to end her marriage to Charles. It's an amazing kind of insight into a specific time period within the end of their relationship, and she is played by Kristen Stewart in the leading role, and wow. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's a very interesting film. It really, really is a fantastic character study. And it gets able support from Timothy Spall's in there. Sally Hawkins is amazing. Sean Harris as well. And Spencer is scored by Johnny Greenwood. See, I told you there was a connection. And it's with one of his cues that we begin. The Boy. Pablo, it's an absolute treat to welcome you to our little podcast soundtrack, and thank you so much for your time, sir. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Before we dive into Spencer, we have talked about you a fair bit in the past, particularly with the fabulous Mika Levy, who we had on the podcast about a year ago, maybe. I don't know. I think it was pre-COVID. COVID's this weird time zone that no one really knows when things happen. So
yeah, we all lost sense of time, right?
Yeah, so weird, isn't it? So bizarre.
It's very weird.
Congratulations on Spencer. It's an extraordinary film. We'll get to music and Mr. Greenwood's brilliant score in a second, but I was really interested to find out where this journey started for you with this particular film.
Well, I guess it started many years ago. I saw my mom as I grew up being so interested on on Diana, and I was very curious to know why. And then she died in '97, and all of a sudden I just realized that my mom was just one among millions, and I kept being very curious why there's such an incredible amount of interest on her. And then for the process of this movie, I of course did an extensive research, books, articles, movies, TV shows, documentaries, you name it. What is incredible is that the more I digged into, the less I knew. And I guess that's because she was very mysterious, and that it's great for cinema. And well, you talked to Mika, and we were not just now. I did other things in between, but I was coming out of Jackie, and we thought that maybe it's a good opportunity to try to get into the myth of Diana, because that's what I think it is. It's a tragic myth, and that somehow it became part of the universal narrative, and this is another version, another take on her life, I think.
The extraordinary thing about the film, I think, is that yes, it is this kind of exploration in this of her kind of her state of mind, her kind of almost trying to escape over this very short period of time. But it could also be a kind of study of so many other people, I think, as well, in terms of a really interesting look at mental health, I think, as well, you know, in terms of how your surroundings, the people that you live with, your responsibilities, the way that you're treated by other people, how they can all weigh up on an individual. And I love that other side to the film as well, that's, you know, that she's experiencing, that she's going through.
Yeah, but I agree. What I think is also interesting is that eating disorders, mental health issues, and all, you know, those crises are very common. And I think to a certain extent, we can all suffer different levels of things that are similar. And I think that's one of the reasons why she created such an incredible amount of empathy. Of course, this the idea of this sort of the princess, the fairy tale, and the royal family, you know, queens, kings, and all that narrative. But at the same time, it's a private side that is more internal, that is full of panic and terror, and it's difficult, and and we wanted to go there and to sort of experience that, and not to walk away from it. And it's important, you know, not to give our backs to that, and to dive into it, and to understand that it's as common as possible, that whatever she experienced. And that's why it's so striking. And it's, you know, you could feel that, you could think that maybe someone like her had such a different life, and somehow she was very normal and ordinary and regular. And that's how, you know, she would just go on television or an interview or whatever, and she would say that she had eating disorders because she had problems. And an eating disorder, we know that it's a consequence of a mental health problem. And so when she does that, then you can only connect with her, you know, and that's what I think we try to do.
I think that's the reason everybody felt like they knew her. You know, you talk about your mum. I remember when she passed away, my mum came down to London from Scotland, and we both went to Kensington Palace and laid flowers, and my mum stood in the queue to sign the book of condolences. This was a woman who meant, you know, that millions of people had never met, but they felt like they knew her. They felt like they were connected to her in some way. And even though this film is so, you know, that you see the solitary nature of her existence, you still get that feeling of the connection that she has with people, whether it's, you know, Maggie, her dresser, or Darren, the chef. You know, she's a people's person. She kind of, you know, she likes to be around people. She doesn't like to be alone. She likes to have people that she can kind of connect with. And I think you've done this in such a beautiful, beautiful way. Sorry, that wasn't even really a question. That was just me spewing out my thoughts about things.
You know what it is that I really appreciate, and you know what it is as well, is that, and it's something that this is credit, of course, to Steve Knight, our writer. He saw the possibility of having her interacting with others that they weren't exactly members of the family. Besides her kids, of course, they're very relevant in the movie, but she would talk to and be more truthful with those who were somehow most similar to her, and that people was usually on the staff, you know, they're members of the service, and yeah, it's what you say. Somehow, we all have a version of Diana in ourselves, and a lot of people felt that, like your mother, that felt that even though very few people actually met her, a lot of people felt that they were close to her, and that is fascinating for cinema, which is what I do. I'm not a journalist, and I'm not a documentary maker. I work with fiction, and yeah, as we have it in the beginning of the movie, it's a fable from a true tragedy.
I love that. You know, it's a good once upon a time, basically, for the film.
Yes.
It really, really is. Yeah. Let's talk about the music, because I loved the kind of almost two sides to this, and you have this fantastic, almost sort of free form improvisation of jazz going on that for me is almost her internalization. It's kind of what she's going through. The music's almost kind of saying more than dialogue can in terms of her state of mind at that particular moment in time. That's what I took from that side. And then you have this kind of more traditional Baroque style that's going on, that's almost the kind of it's the tradition, you know, it's everything that she's surrounded by, that kind of, that she's got to be in that role and perform in that role, and the kind of static nature of it all. I thought it was so powerful and so brilliant, and such a character in the film as well.
I don't know what else to say. You said it all.
Okay, thanks. Good night.
It's true, and of course, that's Johnny. I mean, he had the first idea of doing something that felt more like quote unquote royal music, right? Which is something that would properly fit there, and that's the Baroque ensemble. And even the instrumentation that he used is very sort of classic and sort of very linked to what we could think that's the music that it's proper to what it maybe listened, or it has this part of this understood as the proper historical process that can be linked to a specific type of music. And then he mentioned the idea of breaking it with jazz, with free jazz. And I was like, whoa, okay. And I was, it is a bit of a bold move, but if someone can do that, it's him. So I was like, of course, sure. Do you want to try it? We exchanged some references here and there, and we had a very interesting way of communicating, because I'm very slow writing in English, and he writes very great emails, and they're very particular and very specific. And at some point I said, Johnny, do you mind if I, instead of writing you, because we're going to production, so it was to write a proper email, it would take me a very long time. I'm very slow writing in English. So I asked him if he would be okay if I could send him like voice messages. So that's how we communicate. He would write back and send music, and I would send this little podcast, that I try to make short so it wouldn't annoy him. And that's how we established this communication. And I was very sort of curious because first he started sending more of the Baroque music that was absolutely beautiful, and it's Baroque, but at the same time is coming from Johnny, who has a very particular and specific signature, and so whatever the reference that we discussed, it was ultimately processed by him and the way that he composed. So the string arrangements are very particular, and so that music had already a big weight, and we quickly tried it with the things that we were shooting, and our editor was quickly putting it together, and it worked really well, really quickly. And then the jazz came in, and I was very curious to see how we could combine it. And then later in the process, he sent pieces that had the Baroque and the jazz in the same piece. And that was, an incredible revelation, that it was not only possible, but it was something that it was going to take the movie to a different place. Because it's exactly as you say, it's just that Baroque represents the tradition, the family, and that kind of world and logic. And then the jazz comes in expressing free jazz and jazz dance, which is a very free act of music, whether it's composed and playing. So we usually use the jazz only with her in the movie. We played the jazz only when Diana was on camera, on the scene. And that worked in two layers. One into somehow create a dimension of panic and terror. And in another level, another layer, it worked in another dimension that it was to express her freedom, and how free she was or could eventually be. So it created a very strange balance that what is really wonderful is that we could spend hours talking about it, but the truth is that we can't describe it because it's music and you have to listen to it, and it's a form of art that I admire. I'm a frustrated musician, and I told Johnny I try
Are
to
you?
yeah, I try to play instruments. I try to play piano and guitar, and then the teachers that would try to help me, it was just it's not gonna work. You're not. And then I'm lucky, and then I found a camera, and it took me here, so I'm not complaining. But I do have an enormous love for music, and
But the silences are as important, I think, as to where the music is placed. And I was interested to find out at what point Johnny started creating and what he was creating too. Was it just script, or were you already shooting? So did he see footage? Because Kristen's performance is extraordinary. I mean, I think she's an amazing actress. I think that she's got a fantastic breadth, but I never saw her doing anything like this. And I'm so glad that you did, because I think that it's extraordinary. It's brilliant. She's so great. And it feels that so much of the music is almost kind of under the skin of her performance in a way. So I wondered whether he was writing to her performance parts of it, or the script, or what was he creating to?
Well, all the process of understanding what we wanted to do and what Johnny wanted to do, it was probably throughout the script and a lot of of this interaction with email and this little podcast. And I actually never met him because COVID doesn't help. I think we had one Zoom call, and then it was just email. But I think most of it, I'm trying to remember with more precision, or a lot of it came before, and then we start shooting, and he keeps sending music, and then eventually, once we had certain scenes, we sent him over, so he knew what we were shooting, and then he did other pieces. But mostly, I believe he worked around the things that he had already recorded. So I would say that most of it was made before we shot, and that was very helpful for me because I had all of his music in my phone, and I would switch my headset from the sound of production towards my phone to listen to the music while we were changing scenes or takes. And it really helped me because cinema is about tone, it's about atmosphere, but a lot is about rhythm and speed. So his music gave me the right path. So I tried to sort of serve the music as well with the sort of the tone and the mood, and it really helped me. And I would play to Kristen too, what I had a speaker. It was funny, I had a speaker, like a big speaker, like around my neck. So I would be this guy walking on the set with this huge speaker in my belly, and I would play music depending on the scene for her that was coming from Johnny, and that, I guess, it just created some sort of spiritual connection. I don't know how to express it.
There's so many there's a couple of scenes that I wrote down specifically where that kind of marriage of performance and music is great. And it's so interesting you saying that, because even the kind of the sandwiches scene, she's like, the sandwiches, and then the way that the kind of jazz comes back in, and it's kind of, and then the sort of twinkling sound of sort of chandeliers is there as well. And it's just it's such an insight into where she is at that specific, it's so powerful and brilliant. It really, really is. That was just one of a couple of scenes that really, I thought, were so clever with the way the music kind of, it said more than I think than any dialogue could.
Yeah, and it's incredible what we worked really hard at, and I guess that was one of the biggest challenges. It was really to be inside of her, and see the world through her perspective, and there are ways that sort of tools to do that sometimes can be more or less successful, but yeah, and it's how can you inhabit her perspective, and how could you be with her? So when when some strong emotions or sequences come up, you can actually be with her, and that's great, and it's beautiful, and it's also a lot of fun. Why not?
Yeah, yeah. I also love the church scene as well, and the way the church organ, and then the way that when they leave the church, it's again, when you were talking about how sometimes he would go from the Baroque into the jazz, and sort of almost the sort of almost a wave between the two, and that's a kind of, I love the sort of manipulation of that traditional music in that scene where they're all in that kind of,
But you know that there's a piano composition that it ended up being called Spencer, I think, in the record that will come up. But originally the working title was Partita, like as a Bach partita, and it's a composition in piano that's very simple, but extremely complex in its simplicity. And I remember when he sent a few ideas about the things that we were discussing, and he said, he wrote like PS, like postscriptum. I also was playing on the piano and I did this. And I'm like, okay. I played that and I wrote him back. I said, look, this is what it is. This is the main theme of the movie, because it has this sort of Baroque type of melody, but at the same time goes into something that only Johnny can do. It's a mix of things and emotions and tones that I wouldn't know how to describe it, but that piano piece, and eventually Johnny said, look, I think we might be using it too many times. I'm like, no, it could be repetitive for us, because we listen to it all the time, but I don't think it would be for the audience. Because I've been listening to it for months in the editing room, and I'm not tired of it. And it has something that is very internal, and it feels very, I don't know, it just gets into your bloodstream. And and then my daughter started playing with it, and she ended up playing it. So I was working with it all day long. I would listen at work, and I would come back home, and my daughter was playing it. And I never got tired up until today. I could listen to it endlessly. So yeah.
Why Johnny? Was there a particular score of his that was the reason that you thought he could work his magic for you?
Of course, a big fan from I grew up with the band, of course, and I understand that there's people who looks up at his work in scores, and he had done work with incredible filmmakers, but both, I think, There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread. Those two scores, oh my God, it's just I don't know. I would listen to them, on a loop, and I really wanted to work with him because I feel that it's always very unexpected, and it's very new. And there's a piece in the movie that is quite short, that is called I don't remember right now what's the name that he had, but finally it was like Lacrimosa, which is it's when she's crying in her own room, when she's able to get into the house. And I don't want to spoil the movie, but there's a point where she's actually seated and very lonely and crying in the room that she lived when she grew up. And then that piece of music comes in as she walks in, and she has some memories. And the way that strings are composed and the way that the players play them, combined with everything else that he did in the movie, is, it's wonderful. It's not just beautiful, but what is great is when you work with someone that that his music can only be made by him. And that is a very powerful thing. That's what I guess made him such a real strong artist. That his music, it's so specific to his vision, and he can be very generous to work with others, but never really negotiating with what he does. He's, and it worked out beautiful. I love it, and it's going to be, there will be a vinyl eventually coming out.
That's Christmas sorted.
I said the same, and I, it's just, I told him I was just happy that I was ever involved in something like this.
I love the ending of the film. I was interested if it was easy to kind of decide on the end, and I love that you give us a sing along at the end. I was singing my heart out to a bit of Mike and the Mechanics at the end there, as if I was in the car with them. I love that. So nice. It's nice to have there is so much tragedy around her, and I think the world still misses her as well. It's kind of and this is I feel like you give her a lovely ending in this film.
Yeah, look, because the structure of the movie is it started with a huge crisis that then turns into a sort of more of a psychological terror process where the panic and the horror, it's very vivid. And then eventually she decides to be herself and sort of comes to the realization that she can just do something as simple as just walk out. It might be a big decision, and as she does, there's a point that they just get into the car and the music that comes from her own tapes, that with the cassette that could have been in that car. And then the kids, William just pumps it up, and then it was a whole process to decide what that song could be. It was a very long process, and I had a few ideas that came from different people that was involved, and that I had a list eventually, playlist. And then I because it's funny because of the kids were a lot around, because usually in a movie, actors would come in specifically for the days that they're shooting. But we were in lockdown, so we had them around, and sometimes we were shooting in the same place we were sleeping, in a hotel or some of these big houses, these castles, and so the kids were around all the time. Sometimes they would come in and say, "Hey, can I stay?" I'm sure, just get here, and they would be with me in the video. They became part of the family, the kids. And because one day we were with Kristen and the kids, and I said, like, let me try what do they feel with this song. So I played that song, and they were quickly singing it, and something happened. So it's not only that I thought it was the right song, but mostly was what happened with them, and that is what you can see in the movie. When they're singing in the car, it's very real. They were actually singing it, and it was just beautiful. And I thought it was, proper for the period. It could be a song that she might have liked. And also it's a band that, some of them, the musicians come from Genesis, which is especially the beginning of the first records of that band. I love that. I grew up with them, and I don't know, it feels like right for the period, and it was just a fun thing to do, and it was something that would come from the car and those speakers, and that was important. It's not the music of the film, is something that happens inside of the story, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's lovely. I wondered whilst I was watching it as well, whether for Kristen, of someone who was thrown into the limelight at a very young age and having to deal with the kind of media attention at a very young age, of whether that was something you spoke to her about, of pulling from, her own experiences of trying to maintain privacy, really, of someone trying to find that right relationship with the press and the media.
It's funny. I understand the question really, really well, and we have, but the truth is that I never thought about it. Maybe because I'm not very into that. I don't look at it very much.
Yeah.
But I personally thought that she was just the best option as an actress. And of course, maybe that was important for her process, but that's probably an answer. It's a question more for her than me.
For her, yeah.
But honestly, I never really cared much about that type of relationship in the potential sort of privacy issues in Kristen's life compared to Diana, that I think if there were any, that are very different because of obvious enormous distance that they have in both lives. But yeah, honestly, I understand the question. I don't want to avoid it, but I just don't. It's not something that I consider.
Before we run out of time, two things that will allow us to dive back into them, if you don't mind, quickly. It will give us an excuse to play Saturday Night Fever, to be honest. Tony Manero from 2008. And just this idea of a character obsessed with John Travolta, which that the character from Saturday Night Fever. Do you mind just talking kind of briefly about that film and that character and why that narrative, why that story?
Yeah, it's the movie set in the darkest days of the dictatorship that occurred in my country. It was a long dictatorship, and it's about sort of the transformation and how, you know, a political process linked to an economical project could just create a big amount of distress and eventually create a psychopath, you know. And so it's an uneducated man that lives in Chile and he's in his 50s, and in 1978 the movie is released all over the world and in Chile as well. And it was one of the very few movies that were allowed by the dictatorship back then because it didn't have a very evident political message. And the movie was very popular. And then eventually on television, there's a lookalike contest. So many people would go and try to dance and look like John Travolta back then. So our character is trying to look like him. And in the process of doing so, he just starts killing people. So it's kind of a metaphor of the reality of a very, very bloody dictatorship that we were going through. And it's played by Alfredo Castro, as one of my masters. And of course there's music in it, and the Bee Gees, they have a big role, and the Bee Gees were actually very kind because it was a very, of course, with a limited budget movie made a few years ago, and we asked for the rights for the songs, and they were, yeah, okay, use them, and they didn't charge as much. They could have, and probably if they would have, the movie would have never existed in the way it is. And they were very generous to us, and not just them, but also John Travolta, who's on the movie. So we had to ask for the permission to use his image in the film.
Wow.
And he also went for the minimum of that the union would ask them to charge us. So they were, and also Paramount Pictures, I think, that allowed us to use some of the images from the original film. So there were all these people being very generous to us, and then allowed us to make this very sort of strange and dark movie that has this absurd kind of context where they dance. You should be dancing. That's the song.
And we've run out of time. We haven't even had a chance to chat about Jackie, because it very much feels that music is such an important part of your collaboration and your process, and it just works so magnificently in your creative vision. And it's a real treat to get to chat to you, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, music, it's a very important element, because what I think it does is that you have the image and the sort of the dramatic elements coming from picture, right? And then you have music, and what a great musician would do. And I had the chance to work with someone like Mika and Nicolas Jar, and now with Johnny, is that they would create something that has not only a life by itself, but something that when you put it with picture, it would create a third idea. Music is never really supporting exactly what we're seeing. It's not that we're sad and we play sad music and so on. It's not repeating the code. It's just bringing something else that would elaborate something that can have a cinematic power. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you. Hope we could do it again.
What a treat. I'm off to go and dance to the Bee Gees now for our lunchtime. It's great to chat to you. Take care, Pablo, and massive congratulations on Spencer. It's an extraordinary film. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you. Take care.